Hello and welcome to another quarter-devouring episode of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson. With me today is the guy who retains multiple world records in Street Fighter, the movie, the game for Sega Saturn, Mr. Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello. Yeah, sure do. You know me.
You're the best player at Street Fighter, the movie, the game.
If there's one thing that I'm famous for.
Yeah, you're on all the leaderboards.
Oh, definitely.
This month on the show, we're going to be talking about video game adaptations with reviews of 4 video game-based films released throughout the decade. And we're going to be starting with maybe the biggest one here. I think we're probably going to start off with the biggest one. That's, of course, Super Mario Brothers from 1993. This is the one that kicked off. And now, there were obviously video game adaptations before this. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but I'm sure that they did exist. The Wizard from 1989. I know that's not really an adaptation, but it's very much about video games. Anyway, I have a synopsis here. 2 Brooklyn plumbers, Mario and Luigi, must travel to another dimension to rescue a princess from the evil dictator King Koopa and stop him from taking over the world. This is directed by Annabelle Jankel and Rocky Morton. This is a movie. I love the tagline here. This ain't no game.
I mean, literally, it's true. It's a movie.
Yeah, it's a live action movie where they made a lot of decisions. They made a whole bunch of decisions with this movie.
We're never not making decisions in this movie.
I would say that probably most of you have seen this movie. Most of you have probably seen all of the movies that we're going to be talking about this month. I will say that it was fun to revisit these. So maybe a lot of you saw these as kids, and maybe haven't revisited them as an adult. But this one in particular, and I caught this movie, I don't know, not too long ago, like a couple years ago, and I think that this movie, obviously, it lost a lot of money. It was maligned by critics and audience members. Everybody hated this movie. This movie was an absolute train wreck when it came out. But I think that watching it now in 2023, I think this movie is due for a little bit of a renaissance. And I think that that's starting to happen. I think that people are starting to come around on Super Mario Brothers, the movie.
I hope so, because I actually thought this movie was quite interesting and maybe if not always successful in putting all of its ideas together, it is really quite a fascinating movie, and I think I liked it quite a bit.
I like this movie too. And the thing about this movie, and this is something that I've always said, this movie would have done so much better if they took the Super Mario Brothers IP out of it. If it was just like this kind of crazy 90s sci-fi movie, I think that it would have worked a lot better.
This would have, yeah. I think if you just look at this, I think a lot of this movie was definitely, to look back at its reception, tied up in a lot of people being angry that they felt it diverged too much from the source material. The first thing I would say to that is, if you think about it, all the fundamentals of the Super Mario Brothers as a property are here.
They are.
Yes.
And a lot of the stuff is in here, in maybe not the same way as in the games, but it's represented. I think that the bigger problem here is that the tone of this movie, the aesthetic of this movie is not really anywhere close to the games in any shape or form. I mean, this takes place in this like dystopian underground cyberpunk world. That like just doesn't really match the kind of bright, colorful fun of the Mario series.
Yeah, the second point I would make is related to my first point, is that if this had been maybe, as you said, just a movie that had no direct connection to this franchise. I think it would have probably still not been all that well received at the time, but we probably would not have had to have waited nearly as long for there to be this, cult following and reappraisal of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think at its core, it's not a very good movie. I mean, it's very messy. It's all over the place. There's too much happening in this movie, and I think that these directors, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was a husband and wife team of. I think that they were just. Maybe they just bit off a bit more than they could chew with this movie. This was an ambitious movie, to say the least, and I feel like they were just not really the right people for it. And I think that also maybe this was a case of too many cooks getting involved with such a high-profile production. But, I mean, when you look at... So this, according to IMDb, had a $48 million budget. And I mean, it definitely shows. I mean, again, this was 1993, so $48 million, that's a pretty big budget. But man, the production design on this movie, just the insanely elaborate sets and the amount of extras and like the super like detailed underground cityscapes that they created with like all the different platforms and layers and stuff. There's a lot of verticality in this movie. I thought it was all incredible. Like it just, This movie looks awesome. And I love it.
I think this is something we'll come back to a bit, which is, in this era of lots of these big studio movies that are, especially ones that are connected to big media properties, they kind of have a sameness to how they look and feel now. These are all movies that really kind of just have their own entire visual language and just such a deeply realized aesthetic to it that it really is just fascinating just to look at in a very literal sense.
Yeah, I really like the world that this movie takes place in. I think it's really fun, and again, I feel like at some point this was a different movie, and they decided to pull in the Mario IP into an already existing script. I know that's not what happened, but it feels like that's what happened. You have a really good cast here too. I mean, you have Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo as Mario and Luigi. Like that's I think really good casting, really fun casting. Dennis Hopper is King Koopa. Again, like weird but very fun casting. Samantha Mathis is Daisy. So they're going with Princess Daisy, not with Princess Peach, I guess, because they wanted to have her be the love interest with John Leguizamo's character. And then you have like a lot of really great kind of side characters, like Fisher Stevens is in here and Richard Edson. So good casting, really solid visuals, good score too. I think it was it Alan Silvestri score.
Yep.
So you have a really good score here. There's some fun set pieces. There's certain things that certainly bring it down, but I think that if you can separate the game series from this movie, I think that it's a lot more fun. When you look at it as a Mario adaptation, it is it's rough how they like what they do with like Toad and Yoshi and how they had the super scopes in here, like as sort of a shameless plug for the super scope. And there's some the Goombas, like so many weird decisions in this, turning the king into a fungus, like a living or conscious fungus, I guess. Just strange.
A lot of interesting ideas, as we said earlier. So many. so many choices.
I think a lot of these movies that we're going to be discussing this month have a lot of similarities with them. All four of them contain at least one scene that involves like a super crowded, dark industrial area that has like multi-tiered, multi-level, like chain link fences and like kind of techno music playing. All four of them have at least one scene involving that.
Mm-hmm. And I think we enjoy that.
Oh, any movie, instant bonus points. Any movie that has, we've talked about those scenes on the show before, like in Hackers. Any movie that has a scene like that, I'm all in. 3 of the 4 movies that we're going to be discussing this month feature a person being strapped into a chair and mutated in some fashion. So that was a known trend in the 90s too, is people being mutated.
I don't know. Maybe there's some I don't know, subtext in there about technology or something. I don't know.
Either that or the environment, maybe. Like I know that kind of like in the 80s, like the whole like toxic waste type thing was big. Maybe it's kind of a carryover from that. Maybe they were drawing inspiration from like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles still being very popular.
You're right. It does feature in a lot of this. I didn't quite realize just how much of a through line that was, but yeah, these movies, besides the obvious nature of what they are, they do have more in common than would immediately seem obvious.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, like, I'm wondering, and it would seem to me like the Super Mario Brothers movie almost maybe it influenced some of these other ones that would come later. Hard to say, especially since a lot of them came very close after Super Mario Brothers, the movie. Mm-hmm. But it's just interesting that they all kind of have a similar style to them.
It's interesting to look at the just the list of these movies, how all the movies we're going to be talking this month were released within about a 2.5-year span. Mm-hmm. And there aren't really many more video game movies for several years after that.
Yeah, because they all did well. I think the last one we're going to talk about did pretty good at the box office.
And it should have been. It should have been a hit.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, so, man, I don't know. Revisiting Super Mario Brothers this time around, and I remember as a kid I didn't like it. Like, I remember not liking this movie as a kid, but I guess just revisiting it now, I had fun. I had a really fun time with this movie. I think that there are aspects of it that are really well done. I mean, it feels like a big budget, kind of popcorn movie, but at the same time, you don't get movies that are like that have this kind of level of griminess to them anymore. Like, so many movies back then were just gross and grimy and dark. And I'm not saying that movies should all be like that or anything, but we just don't really.
A few once in a while, I think, would make things more interesting.
Yeah, a few once in a while. I mean, we don't want to go overboard with it. Like, the aesthetic of Super Mario Brothers, there are so many movies that came out in this era that looked like that. I mean, all 4 movies that we're going to be talking about this month looked like it pretty much. I think the one of them, not really, but the other ones definitely. And then, like, you have movies like Dark City and The Crow and all of these movies that are like, that take place in these kind of dirty, trash-filled cities and stuff. And I don't know, like, where that inspiration came from. Like, I don't know if it was like RoboCop, maybe. I don't know. Maybe even Blade Runner. Maybe some Blade Runner inspiration there. I'm not sure, but either way,
It's interesting.
I now can say that I do like the Super Mario Brothers movie. It basically ruined the career of the directors, which is unfortunate.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think they pretty much got out of the game
Hmm.
after this. But
It's not, this is not a nice industry to people who want to try something different, is it?
no, no, no. I will say that if you're looking for a Mario movie that sticks close to the source material, then the new one, the animated one, is definitely the one you should pick, because that one is basically just like lifting elements directly from the games,
Hmm.
for better and for worse, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, that seems like more. Well, yeah, I suppose you can make some interesting comparisons between maybe to the point I was making earlier. Uh, what a conceptualization of a movie like this would have been in 1993 versus what it would be in 2023.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because like video game movies have been there's a like they say that their video game adaptations are cursed because almost all of them are horrendous and are complete failures. Like even to this day, when a video game adaptation comes out, it's usually like not not gonna be not very good. It's not gonna like crack the code, so to speak. I mean, maybe you could say the Last of Us series on HBO Max, like maybe that's the one that really cracked the code. But
I think it seems to be that seems to primarily affect live action adaptations of video games. And maybe there is something there about the nature of turning it into a physically, tangible world. But you would begin to wonder if maybe if, as you said, the current trend is any indication, maybe just because of how video games are able to look now, that
yeah,
some of that
yeah,
work of translation isn't there anymore.
and also the fact that there's stronger narratives in video
Hmm.
games these days. Like when you look at
Yeah.
The Last of Us, I mean, the game is structured very much like a movie or TV show, and when you watch the TV show, you realize that it's like beat for beat, almost shot for shot, what happens in the game. And I think that's good and bad. I think that using The Last of Us as an example, I think that they did a good job of striking a balance of giving the fans what they want, being a 1-to-1 adaptation of the game, and then also adding additional flavor to it by expanding on some of the like characters and storylines and stuff. So I think that they struck a really nice balance. But I think that for like Super Mario Brothers at the time, this 1993, there weren't like that many games out. And by this point, I think Super Mario World was probably the last one. So that's like 4 mainline Super Mario games that they were working with, as far as content. And like the Mario games don't have much of a story there. I
Yes.
mean, there's not a lot going on.
Yeah.
So I think it certainly would be more difficult to adapt that, or some of the other movies that we're going to be discussing that are like fighting games that also virtually have no plot whatsoever.
Yeah, it does not. It is quite astonishing to me that those were the uh, games that they chose to adapt into feature narrative films.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just because those were like the most talked about and popular ones at the time. Like, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of other games would probably make more sense, but these were the money makers. These were the ones that were like really pushing the numbers. So I guess it makes sense, but I understand that it must have been really difficult to adapt, this stuff. But I mean, the Sonic the Hedgehog movie that's live action, and they did their own thing with it. And those movies, the first and the second one, they're not bad. Like they're okay.
I think then you would also get to a point where maybe sensibilities towards how these projects might be received in the broader culture have also changed uh, as well. Just tastes and trends are now fully caught up to that, and in terms of uh,
Mm.
video games as just fully
Certainly,
part of the.
yeah. I think that is an important aspect of it too. Is that certainly video games are more mainstream and they're more sort of widely known and adopted by people today than back then. I mean,
Yeah.
in the early '90s, it was just kids. You know, it was just
Mhm.
kids in arcades, kids playing Nintendo. Like that's really all it was. But I think that as the years went on, video games matured, as the fans matured, and now, you know, you can be like me, almost 40 and still playing video games every day.
Yeah. I also feel like our discussion, we're, I don't know, setting up that like the next handful of live action adaptations are just going to be terrible or something, just as soon as we put this discussion out into the world. Just completely disproving everything we've suggested.
Yeah, I have. Look, I would love for the next 10 game adaptations to be really good, but
Mm.
to me, I just don't. I have no expectations that any of them are going to be good. There's that Gran Turismo movie that's going to be coming out this year, and to me, that doesn't look very good. But I mean, I want it to be good. I think that they're doing something interesting with that adaptation specifically. I don't know what
Yeah,
else is being
I don't know.
adapted, but
I don't know. I didn't have any particular movies in mind. I just thought as soon as we've had this long discussion about the changes in how these movies are, what they're first, what they're being adapted from, and then how they can be made and kind of shaped. I thought it just we'll just enter in another grim era of adaptations or something, just to
yeah,
prove
very
wrong about
very
everything. I don't know.
very well could.
Yeah, who knows? I think we're just at the point where maybe it's just the wrong way to think about it in general. So
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
So
That's on this podcast. That's the underlying statement to any such predictions I make. I don't know.
I think one thing we can say is, well, you know, even then, I was going to say, well, it's not like they're going to get worse, but you know what? At least with a lot of the earlier ones, there's like a certain nostalgia factor to them.
Yeah, I don't even know. Can really big movies get like, as bad in the way we think about them? Usually they kind of round out to just being lifelessly mediocre, which is certainly terrible in its own way.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that some of the video game, like the Uwe Boll stuff that would come out later, like in the 2000s, like that has to
Yeah, but
be rock bottom. That has to be rock bottom for video game movies. So
yeah. Well,
maybe it is only upwards from there.
yeah. I mean, I was just thinking that because I'm looking at the list of like the films based on video games, looking at the last few major live action adaptations, and they all get kind of middling to mildly enthusiastic reviews, just because maybe that says something about the wider how we're thinking about these big studio properties and what they end up being. But who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it might not even be just the fact that they're video game adaptations at this point. It might just be just the state of the Hollywood blockbuster and how, I mean, for me, I'm just so worn out of pretty much everything that's coming out, like all the Marvel movies and stuff like that. Like I've zero interest in any of them because I feel like
It's just fine.
oh, and that's the thing. Like,
Yeah.
they're all the same. It's just it's
Yeah.
not like they're going to be offensively bad or anything, but they're just going to be boring. Like I saw Ant-Man, that new Ant-Man, and it was so boring to me. Like I just couldn't stand how dreadfully boring it was. And like I think that sucks because like when the whole like Marvel Cinematic Universe thing started, I was so excited and like, man, I was just over the moon for these movies. I thought it was so cool. But now it's just like, guys, you gotta switch it up. You gotta come up with something new here.
I don't know if it's just the bubble that I'm in, but I feel like we're increasingly getting it to it being a very common position that it's overstayed its welcome.
Yeah. I think so. I think so.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, I think so. I'm just thinking, the broader, public, I think, is now getting to that position as well. Because it used
Well,
to be, no
yeah. I
matter.
mean, like I think that the box office is
Yeah,
reflecting that, right?
yeah. Because for a while, it was just no matter how boring they were, they'd all make $1 billion anyway.
Yeah, but
Like some of them were good, but they didn't make any more money than usually than the ones that weren't.
yeah, exactly. And recently, I feel like the last few that have been coming out, like I don't know how Guardians 3 did, but I know that Ant-Man didn't do great. Now, of course, the new Mario movie, that thing crushed. Holy.
That is like. I mean, I feel good about it because it's a movie in theaters doing well, which feels so rare now. But that one just broke every projection set for it multiple times over. It felt like.
Yeah, that one is like over 1 billion worldwide, right? That thing just crushed it.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, the original 93 one, not so much. We're looking at about $21 million off of a $48 million budget. So not great on that one. But you know what? If you haven't seen it, I would say check it out.
Oh, definitely.
It's so bizarre. Like and I think that it does a great job of. I think it's a great representation of the decade too, as are all of the movies that we're going to be discussing this month. Moving on, we're going to be next talking about Double Dragon. This came out in 1994. It's directed by James Yukich. I have a synopsis here. Two brothers have half of a powerful ancient Chinese talisman. An evil gang leader has the other half and determines to get the brother's half and have a complete medallion so he can gain absolute power. Nice.
There we go.
That's the synopsis that I'm looking for right there.
Yeah, it felt like we haven't gotten a real classic for a while on that front, but
this one's up there. This one's pretty deranged. I'm hoping for more. Maybe later we'll get something better. I don't know.
And I will say that told me more about the plot than I actually gleaned from watching this movie. But
now Double Dragon, this is probably in what is, I would say, objectively 4 not very good movies. This is the worst out of the 4.
Definitely
handily the worst out of the 4. And yet, I still have fun with Double Dragon. This got a Blu-ray release not too long ago. It was like a remaster, and I think it was on that MVD Rewind collection. And I think I wrote a review for this actually. And so if you're into Double Dragon the movie, the Blu-ray has a ton of like behind the scenes stuff and interviews and all kinds of stuff. So all 4 people that are big Double Dragon fans.
I was just thinking, when we talked about Super Mario Brothers, we were discussing how maybe it would have been more appreciated at the time or right after if it hadn't been part of, the Mario franchise. But on the other hand, being part of this, video game franchise does maintain the interest so that any other movie with Double Dragon's reception and profile would have just, I guess, sunken into, just languished and just been completely forgotten, and certainly would not have gotten a Blu-ray release.
Yeah, probably. This one had a budget of $7.8 million. And it grossed $2.3 million. So this one was a huge bomb. A very minuscule budget in comparison to Super Mario Brothers, and that shows. I would say that this is also an ambitious movie for the budget, because there are some pretty, big elaborate sets in this, but everything looks super cheap. Like everything looks like it's on the set of a Nickelodeon, like a 90s Nickelodeon game show, like Legends of the Hidden Temple or Guts or something. Like everything looks styrofoam and plastic. And I love how like they'll be like using something and like it's clearly just wobbling around like computers and stuff. They'll just be like wobbling around. That's kind of how it is in the next movie we're going to talk about too. Actually, like the sets and stuff are elaborate, but they're not very well.
It does turn out that an endearing aesthetic I appreciate is movies that look like game show sets.
Yeah, I kind of like that too, actually.
Yeah.
So if you weren't aware, Double Dragon is a very popular beat 'em up arcade style game. I don't know how many of them were released by the time this movie came out. Probably 3, I would guess. If I had to guess, I would say 3 Double Dragon movies probably came out by this point. It stars Mark Dacascos as Jimmy Lee and Scott Wolf as Billy Lee. Mark Dacascos makes sense in this because he was on the come up at this point. Like he started doing a lot more action stuff as the decade went on. Scott Wolf, on the other hand, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure that he was a good fit for this. I don't think he was a good fit.
It appears that these are both actors for whom we've previously discussed movies they were in. Mark Dacascos was the star of Only the Strong.
Hell yeah.
Scott Wolf was in Go.
Oh yeah, Go. I forgot.
I
forgot he was
do
in
not
that.
recall particularly liking either movie, but
yeah,
it was not really their fault.
No, I like Mark Dacascos. I mean, Scott Wolf doesn't offend me in any way. I feel like he wasn't really. I think he was a little bit miscast in this. This movie's just too goofy. Like it's just too. I think like the Mario movie, it's not sure really who it wants, who the audience is for this. Like, who is this designed for? Is it like 13-year-old boys? Because it is PG-13, so it is a little bit more adult than Mario. Very small amount. But there's just so many like kind of goofball things. Like they add in like zany like cartoon sound effects and stuff in this, and like I don't know. There's like the effects work is not very good. There's not a ton of it here. Like I didn't mention the CG that was in Mario. There's some 90s CG in it, but it's used in a very, very like small way. And so most of what you see in the Mario movie is practical, like animatronics and makeup effects. I thought that the creature design and all that stuff in the Mario movie was really good. In this movie, however, there's not as much in the way of effects work. But what is here is very cheesy looking and not shot very well either.
It is truly the worst of the four. There's not really an angle where it's better than any of them at any particular thing.
No, I mean, and the weird thing is like it seems like they're trying to convey some sort of like social messaging with this movie too. Like it almost feels like they're trying to go the RoboCop route where like you're dealing with this city, this what's it called? New Angeles or something?
New Angeles. Post earthquake.
Yeah, so it takes place in 2007 in New Angeles.
This is not what 2007 looked like, as it turned out.
No.
I always do love when movies try to set themselves only a few years in the future because they're just willingly saying we're just ready to make this look absolutely crazy.
Yeah, apparently in the just over like was it 13 years, an earthquake destroyed Los Angeles and somehow turned it into like a dystopian sci-fi world. Like, I don't know what you guys were thinking there.
I believe also a world in which Jerry Brown is vice president, and the reason there's like some throwaway line like on a newscast where they're like Vice President Jerry Brown did whatever, and it's First of all, this is like the second movie we've talked about on this show that has some throwaway reference about Jerry Brown, after Jade, of course.
Hmm.
And second, like I think it's also a sideswipe at Jerry Brown, because I think it's implying that like it requires a post-apocalypse for Jerry Brown to become vice president, or
Yeah.
because like it would have been like, like that's also the joke in Jade. This is like after he's run for Senate and lost, run for president and lost, and then it's before his kind of comeback. That man, they really hated Jerry Brown in Hollywood in the mid '90s. I don't know what was going on there. It's like right after they make some, uh, take a side swipe at Madonna too, and that same thing. It's like a newscast segment. Like, but yeah, they were just, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on with this.
Yeah, there were. Like I said, I feel like that they were trying to go like some kind of RoboCop route, because they had like fake commercials in this, and then you had like the just the TV stuff was so random and like pointless. Like were they just trying to be funny, or were they trying to be satirical? Like what?
Yeah, I think it seems like it's from somebody who watched RoboCop and thought that the point was that they had those segments and not the content and context of them that makes it satirical.
Because they also try to talk about like the police. So like Alyssa Milano's in this, and she's like the leader of this like kind of rebel group of kids that are like protecting the city, I guess, because the cops can or won't. And then her dad is like the police chief or something. And then like, so there's this whole thing where like the cops are not, they're like afraid to go out because the gangs took over and stuff. So it's just, it's weird. And then also, of course, they talk a lot about the pollution, the toxic water, the smog. There's actually one of the news segments features Andy Dick as the weather person on the news show.
Very.
It's just it's not funny. Even like no kid would get any of the jokes. First of all, like the dumb, like the pop culture jokes that were dated for 1994. Like it just none of it works.
All of it's really bad, and even if they didn't have Andy Dick appear, it would have been bad.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes it worse, obviously. But.
Yes. Yeah. The fact that it has this like very kind of loose Double Dragon theme, the Double Dragon thing adds really very little to the story at the end of the day. I mean, what you're left with here is just a kind of a generic sci-fi action movie that, again, I still had fun watching it, but more like on a so bad it's good type of level, where it's so over the top, and this the CG again, like where Robert Patrick uses the talisman and like turns himself flat. Like he turns into like a CG version of him that's like flat, and like it's so bad.
Listen, what's important is that it's vitally important that anyone playing these, ridiculous villain characters in these movies is clearly having a horrific time doing it.
Yeah,
I mean,
across the board, like the villains are just hamming it up.
Complaints about these performances.
Yeah, it's kind of a, I can't really believe this movie exists. Like, I think it's the one that the least amount of people probably have seen on this list, and with good reason. I think that it's one that just doesn't really work on any level, but it's still kind of fun.
Man, it's not, there's nothing boring like that. I think that's the point I keep coming back to. It's like, it's not boring. And like, none of these movies are boring. Some of them are, like this one is not good. I don't know if I could go to the point of saying, yeah, you should watch it. But
No,
it's like,
yeah,
so many movies now, large scale movies, are just boring. But none of these are.
No, no, they're definitely not boring. Good, maybe not. Boring, definitely not. So that's Double Dragon. Again, that's there's a really nice Blu-ray for this out there if you want to dive into that. See some cool like they did get Mark Dacascos and Scott Wolf to do new interviews and stuff, and they tell a lot of stories about what it was like on set and everything. Talk about that sweet jet ski chase scene. All right, moving on. We're next talking about Street Fighter. This also came out in 1994. This was December 23rd. So this was much higher profile compared to Double Dragon. I have a synopsis here. Colonel Guile and various other martial arts heroes fight against the tyranny of dictator M. Bison and his cohorts. This is written and directed by Stephen E. D'Souza. And this is one that I liked this as a kid. I remember that people were hating on this one, like when it came out, from the moment that it came out, really. But I liked it as a kid. Revisiting it now, I'm kind of like comparing all four of these movies. I kind of feel like this one is a little bit lower on my list now. Like I used to like this way more than Super Mario Brothers, but I kind of feel like that's flipped a little bit. But I still, again, had fun with Street Fighter. This is one that obviously it's based on Street Fighter 2, the arcade game, and it features all of the characters from Street Fighter 2 some of them are very much shoehorned in and serve almost no purpose and are not at all like their characters in the game, but they squeezed them all in there. A lot of weird decisions made with this movie as well. Of course, you have Jean-Claude Van Damme starring as Guile, the American colonel, despite his French accent, his very thick accent. Raul Julia as M. Bison, again, hamming it up like Robert Patrick did in Double Dragon.
Great performance. No, he's very good in this, and unfortunately, I believe it was the final project. Yeah,
it was. I mean, a lot of people when they talk about this movie, they're just like, it was Raul Julia's final movie. Final movie was Street Fighter.
But he's good at it. Like, this is a good performance.
Yeah, he was very good in this as M. Bison. Good casting here. I think just the casting in general of this one, I think, is fine. Like, some of the choices in some of these movies, as far as casting, I'm just like, I don't know. But this one, I think, works for the most part. Van Damme, like, I get that it's goofy to have him as Guile, but it's also weird to have Guile as being the main character in this movie when I don't feel like he was like he wasn't really one of the more popular characters, but I guess being an American movie, you want to get the American soldier guy as the main character. But anyway, like, as far as casting Van Damme as Guile, like, I don't necessarily have a problem with it because I don't know who else you would get in that role at the time, like,
yeah,
Arnold would be like too big, like he would be just too beefy. And I don't know who else you would get that would have that kind of leading man vibe to him, where Van Damme can do the action stuff, very easily, but he also has that charisma to him where he can crack jokes and stuff, you know?
Mm.
And so I think at the end of the day, he was probably the best pick. Kylie Minogue was cast as Cammy, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, like everybody else was fine. I think that this movie, more than any of the other ones, just really struggled. They just felt like they had to get all of the characters squeezed in whichever way that they could, to the point where like E Honda and Balrog were like a cameraman and a I don't know, technical guy for a news company.
If anything, that kind of gives it a problem that a lot of modern big, IP adaptations have. It feels stunningly contemporary in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, it's bloated. They crammed so much in. I remember when like one of the X-Men movies came out. I think it was the third X-Men movie where it was an onslaught of characters, and each character was like on screen for like 5 minutes, and you're just like, whoa, what's going on? Slow down. I feel like that's kind of how this movie is. There's just they knew that they wanted to get all of the characters in, and it's like they wrote the script around that, but they kept like kind of painting themselves into a corner where like, well, what are we gonna do with Cammy? All right, well, just have her be like Van Damme's sidekick. What about T-Hawk? Same thing. Let's just make him a sidekick. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's that I just have seen this movie a bunch of times, but rewatching it for this, I was just a bit underwhelmed with Street Fighter. I still think it's a fun movie. I think it is bad, and I don't particularly like the plot here, like the story where it's like, I can't remember the name of the fake country that it takes place in. Like, I can't remember, but
yeah,
it's like the most basic plot ever, where like M. Bison is a dictator. He's trying to take over the country, and Guile teams up with a bunch of other Street Fighter people to take him down. Like, it's just really, it's basic, which isn't necessarily a problem, but what you also have here is just really basic action scenes that are not choreographed very well. So what you're left with is just kind of a super generic action movie with, some kind of cheesy Street Fighter stuff thrown in.
Yeah, that's kind of the, there's a problem if the fighting in your movie called Street Fighter is not very compelling.
I feel like there is opportunity for a good Street Fighter movie. Like, I think that they could easily make a good Street Fighter movie, but they haven't. Like, they've made, I think there's maybe three Street Fighter movies, live action ones at this point or something, and they're all bad. Like, the other ones are even worse. The newer ones are even worse than the original one. They also released a Street Fighter 2 animated movie. It was Japanese, and that was actually very good. And I feel like if they just adapted that into live action, it would have worked a lot better. I feel like what they did here was just, I don't know, kind of not very clever.
Yeah, I don't have any particularly strong feelings on this movie, as you could probably guess. I don't have really much to offer. It just is. It's just here.
So what did Stephen E. D'Souza, what else did he direct? Did he direct anything that was?
Yeah, he did not really.
No.
You don't really think of him as a director, do you?
No.
This appears to be.
It was his his only feature film that he directed. Of course, he is known for being a writer. He wrote 48 Hours and Die Hard and Commando, so he's pretty prolific in the action genre. But yeah, this one I guess was his
This is
first
only,
and
like,
last foray into
theatrical, like, studio
yeah.
credit. It looks like he did some TV, but yeah, this is the only theatrical studio film. It looks like that he directed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. This one I just feel like even though I liked it as a kid, I just don't feel like this one really holds up.
Yeah, I like I said, I don't really have much to say about it. Like I kind of feel the same way. It's just
All right.
it's there. There's good things about it, but yeah, it's not.
Not boring, but it's like
No, but it's not as compelling. And the things about the memorable movies here today is that they're always compelling.
yeah. They're always something. I mean,
Speaking of which,
speaking of which, let's move on to our final film. We're talking about Mortal Kombat. Of course, we're talking about Mortal Kombat. We wouldn't be. It would be blasphemous if we didn't talk about Mortal Kombat on this episode. This came out in 1995, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. I think I do want to talk about his work at some point during this conversation. I have a synopsis here. 3 unknowing martial artists, are summoned to a mysterious island to compete in a tournament whose outcome will decide the fate of the world. So, obviously, this is based on the infamous arcade game, later released on consoles. This the game, sparked huge amounts of controversy. There were hearings about this movie. This is the game. This is one of the games that was instrumental in the creation of the ESRB, which is like the rating system for video games, because of the over-the-top gore and violence that was in the games. It was kind of on a level that hasn't been seen before previously.
I think 90s, 2000s culture wars about these sorts of things probably deserve just more scholarly research into the exact thing that was,
Yeah, it was
going on.
It was like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, which was like a really weird choice to do Night Trap, because Night Trap wasn't even that violent. I guess because it was live action, they wanted to go after that one. But I think Joe Lieberman was one of the like instrumental people with that. I think he was one of the people that was like heading up that whole moral panic.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
At any rate, I loved Mortal Kombat as a kid, so when this movie came out, I was obsessed. Opening weekend, immediately went to see this movie. It came out on, let's see, when did it come out? August 18th. Yeah, so the summer of 95. And boy, did I love this movie. I think that I had the wherewithal to kind of see it for what it was back then, but I still just, as a huge fan of the games, I was just beyond excited for it. The first thing that I guess we could note here is that, the games were super violent. They had the fatalities and all the blood and stuff like that. The movie, not so much. This was a PG-13 movie, so I guess they were, concerned about their target audience, which was like 10 to 14-year-old boys. I guess they were concerned about them being able to see this movie, so they kind of neutered it a little bit. Which,
understanding the intended target audience, it was probably...
Yeah, it was a little bit of a bummer. What you do have here is pretty much all of the Mortal Kombat characters that were in the series up until when this came out. There was the classic tournament. Ed Boon, the creator of Mortal Kombat, is listed as a co-writer on this. So the story here follows the games pretty closely. And as such, I think that the story as it were, with Mortal Kombat is the best out of the four that we're discussing today. Because it's simple, but it works. Like, you know, it's very much like a kind of blood sport type of thing, or I guess Enter the Dragon, where you have a tournament that the top fighters across the world have to go and fight. And it's more than just a regular tournament, though. It's all of the different realms. I guess this is like a kind of a multiverse situation. All the different realms are fighting, and if one realm wins 10 years in a row, I think it is, or 10 tournaments in a row, then like they can merge with another realm or something. I can't remember. It's something like that.
It's the details don't really matter. This is a no thoughts, just vibes kind of movie.
Yeah, I think so. At the end of the day, really all you want to see is your favorite Mortal Kombat characters fighting each other. That's pretty much what you want to see. I mean, aside from the fatalities, which unfortunately you do not see in this. I mean, people do get killed, and of course they have to say all of the lines from the game, so you do hear the fatality, like that type of thing in here, but they're not nearly as violent or brutal. You know, I've seen this movie a bunch of times. I've seen it fairly recently also. I think I rewatched this one when the 2021 Mortal Kombat came out. So
I didn't see that. How was that?
Not good. It was violent. I mean, they definitely made it violent, but unfortunately it was just average. It was actually like kind of dull, like surprisingly dull.
This movie, however, is not dull.
Oh no!
So immediately it would seem to win on that front.
Yeah, you know, whereas Super Mario Brothers and Double Dragon, they had a little bit of 90s CG. This movie goes overboard with the 90s CG. It is chock full of 90s CG. Maybe some of the worst that you will ever see. Maybe some of the decade's worst CG.
Yeah, but would you want it to be good?
No, of course not. No, it's perfect. Like the reptile animation in this is on a whole other level of bad. Like, I feel like maybe I could animate a better looking reptile creature than what you see in this movie. It's so atrocious, and it's hilarious. It's just hilarious. Really elaborate set work on this one too. A lot of it looks like a Nickelodeon show again, especially the in the castle or wherever the hell they were, like that inside the castle or dungeon or whatever. Like it looked like there was a lot of styrofoam in there. But then when the scene when Johnny Cage was fighting Scorpion in I don't know, whatever, the nether realm or hell or wherever the hell they were, like that looked really cool. You know, where there were all the bridges and stuff and platforms, bamboo everywhere. Like, so a lot of the sets were really cool. The fight scenes were pretty decent in this as well. And I think that the reason is because they actually cast some people who specialized in martial arts. So whereas, you know, in the other movies, like specifically Double Dragon, and maybe to a lesser extent Street Fighter, you had like, you know, one like Van Damme. You know, Van Damme is obviously good at doing choreographed fight scenes, but most of the other people were not very good. Here you have a couple people who are not good and a lot of people who are. So you have like Robin Shou as Liu Kang, even Lyndon Ashby as Johnny Cage. Like even he was pretty decent in his the fight scenes that he was involved in. So I think that, Paul W.S. Anderson was smart in making it like an action first type of movie, where rather than casting actors to do action, you cast, stunt people or actors who focus on action to do, to do the acting roles. And I think that kind of worked in its favor. The script didn't work in its favor, but I don't know. What did you? So I take it you were into Mortal Kombat. It seemed like.
Yeah. No, this is I enjoyed this film. I said no thoughts, just vibes, and the vibes are great. I feel like we should point out, we've talked about, you've mentioned many of the things about this movie, but I think one of the most important ones is one of the very first things you hear, the first thing you hear as soon as the movie starts, which is the soundtrack.
Of course, the iconic Mortal Kombat song that plays, I think, twice in this, which is not, but it's two different parts of the same song, so it feels fresh. It's not overused or anything. Perfect. I think that comes in at a perfect time. Comes in
officially a classic now, I think. Say. Yeah.
The Mortal Kombat soundtrack is one of those classic 90s soundtracks. It also the end of this movie ends with that Orbital song. Can't remember the name of the song, but it's from Orbital, and that's the same song that was in Hackers. So that song had a lot of good use in the 90s. But yeah, great soundtrack. Get you pumped. Felt like you were at a rave the whole time. Also, there is a scene when we're introduced to Sonya Blade, and they're at a club scene, and it's one of those industrial, dark, crazy club 90s club scenes, like chains hanging everywhere and stuff. She's literally shooting people with a shotgun in this club, and people aren't like doing anything. They're just still dancing. They're vibing so hard that even a person blasting people with a shotgun right beside them is not ruining their vibes.
Well, if all the music in this world is as good as the soundtrack is, I mean.
Oh yeah.
It's
worth it.
Yeah. So Paul W.S. Anderson.
One thing before we get into this guy, one thing that I always remember about this movie is, like I said, when I was a kid, loved this movie, was obsessed with it when it came out. I went with my cousin to see it, and he bought this like magazine that was like it was like a behind the scenes of Mortal Kombat. Like they release like magazines that are like kind of one-off, like special things. And I'll never forget that when they were talking about Goro, the character of Goro, who, as you may know, is like the four-armed creature. In it, they were like, "How did you make Goro?" And I think it was an interview with Paul W.S. Anderson. I can't remember because I was like, literally like a child. But they answered and said like, "That's just a secret. We can't really talk about what we do with Goro." And they were like trying to allude that it was like actually a four-armed person or something. And it was just, I'll never forget that, because even as a kid, I'm like, why would they BS us like that? Since then, there have been like on the Blu-rays and stuff, there's a lot of behind the scenes footage of them designing and testing the Goro animatronic, which was very good, by the way. I think they did a really good job with the Goro. The specifically the facial details, like they could do so many different expressions with that puppet. It looked really good. Anyway, this was it wasn't his debut. It wasn't Paul W.S. Anderson's debut, but it was like maybe his second feature or something. Let me see.
And it was his first. Looked to be his first major studio.
Yeah, because he did Shopping, which I never saw.
I know I haven't seen
before
it.
this. Although I do want to see Shopping, because it looks interesting. There's a lot of cool people in it.
And definitely a director where it would be interesting to see how early some of the
And that's the thing. Like,
elements of his career have been, in his style.
You're like, how did he get Mortal Kombat? Like, how, from Shopping to Mortal Kombat, and then from there, you're just, I mean, it's just a landslide. It's just going straight downhill. Like, we talked about Event Horizon on this show before, and maybe we even talked about Paul W.S. Anderson.
I think we had a pretty long discussion about, maybe a little bit about him, but definitely a lot about just like the look of Event Horizon.
Yeah, and I still like Event. I love Event Horizon. Actually, I think that's Paul W.S. Anderson's best movie. Not to say that I don't think it's objectively a great movie or anything like that, but I still revisit that movie quite a bit. I like sci-fi horror, and I think that this does. I feel like that there's so few like really good atmospheric sci-fi horror movies, and I think Event Horizon does a really great job with that. With that being said, like everything else, man, just like straight downhill. Like Soldier was super. I liked Soldier as a kid, but that's because I was like obsessed with Kurt Russell when I was a kid. I think and maybe Soldier is one that we can add to our list, because I would like to revisit that. But like the Resident Evil movies, like that's kind of the big thing that he got going, was the Resident Evil movies. He did the first Alien versus Predator, which was, horrible. The sad thing is I've seen most of his movies.
I was about to say, I know there is like a certain critical subset that does actually like the Resident Evil movies. There is discussion about them whenever.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Resident Evil movies are sort of like the Fast and Furious movies to me.
Yeah.
Where like I saw the first Resident Evil movie when I was younger. I saw it in the theater, hated it because I was a huge fan of the video game series, and I thought that they did an absolutely horrible job adapting it, and that really bothered me. So I hated the movie. But then, like, several years ago, and I've seen a couple of the other sequels here and there, but several years ago, I marathoned the whole series, and I had a blast with it. So I don't recognize the movies as being good. But again, like, I was able to, when I did the like kind of marathon, I was able to separate the game series from the movie series and sort of just enjoy the movie series for what it was, like as a standalone thing. And I got a lot more out of it. And I will say that the Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evil movies are way better than that Raccoon City one that they released, like, what was that, like 2020 or 2021 or whatever. And also the Netflix show, which was atrocious. So, like, he might not be the best director, but it could always be worse.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he did the Monster Hunter movie, which was also a video game adaptation, which was that was horrible too. So yeah, he's like a couple steps up from Uwe Boll, couple large steps up from Uwe Boll.
Yeah, I don't really have much knowledge of his filmography outside of Event Horizon, but I was like, this person has a very interesting way to make movies. That's all. That's most of what I had to offer.
Yeah. So Mortal Kombat did have a sequel, Mortal Kombat Annihilation. It was tremendously worse than the first one. Absolutely horrible. I remember seeing that one in the theater with two of my friends, and I remember having to use the restroom during it and just not even like really caring at what point I get up to use the, because sometimes you wait, you got to go to the bathroom when you're in the movie. You wait until you think that there's going to be a little bit of a downtime. Like this feels like it's a good time. It's like a little conversation. Doesn't seem like there's much going on. I'm going to run out, use the restroom, come back in. I won't have missed too much. But I remember thinking to myself, there's no point. I'm just going to go right now. It's like in the middle of a fight scene. I don't care. I don't care. That one looked so bad. The CG was worse than the first one. All of the like costumes and sets looked so cheap. They looked like something that was purchased from Spirit Halloween. Like just awful movie. And then there were a bunch of animated ones, and those were actually quite good. I only saw, I think, one of them. And I'm not talking about, there was like a 90s animated one, I think, or maybe it was even a series. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the newer ones that came out just a couple of years ago, around the time of the new live action one. Those were actually pretty good. They were, I would say that they're kind of on par with the DC animated movies as far as like quality. So those are actually worth watching. And then, like I mentioned, the 2021 version, which I think did a good job of staying true and sort of paying homage to the series. It did a good job in that regard, but I think it was just lackluster as far as like the fight scenes and everything in between the fight scenes. I remember being just really boring. So I don't know. Apparently they're working on a sequel to the 2021 one, which I think is good, because I think one of the complaints I had about the 2021 one was that it didn't feel complete. Like, it's Mortal Kombat, but they never even get to the tournament in it. So it definitely feels like it's the start of something, and there should be more. At least you get to see the whole tournament in this one.
Yeah.
But yeah. Other than that, I don't have too many complaints about it. The dialogue is super cheesy. They shoehorn in all the stuff from the games. Like I said at the beginning of the review, they have all the characters. The casting is okay. I'm not sure how I feel about Christopher Lambert being Raiden. Especially
he's making a lot of choices here.
Especially because at the beginning of the movie, he talks in this like gruff, like, I see you're going to the tournament. And then later on in the movie, he's just like, he's talking regular, like just regular old Christopher Lambert.
It's such a joy.
So I'm not sure what that was all about. He just dropped the weird gruff tone. But yeah, I don't know. For the most part, I thought the rest of the casting was fine. I didn't have any major complaints about the casting. Like, I would probably cast it differently now. I don't know, like, but
I mean, it's hard not to appreciate it as it is, I think, in its way.
Yeah. Cary Hiroyuki Takagawa was Shang Tsung, and he's the big bad guy of this one, and of course, like the other three movies, he totally hams it up in the best ways. He's the one who gets to say all the lines from the game, like, finish him.
It's an important part, and it's an important part to have.
Yeah. But yeah, of course you have this Scorpion and Sub-Zero in this. You don't get to see the two of them fight each other. In this one, they're like being mind controlled by Shang Tsung, so they end up fighting the good guys. Mm-hmm. I always liked Scorpion and Sub-Zero. Those were kind of my favorites. They also made a weird decision with the harpoon that comes out of Scorpion's hand to make it like a living creature, which was kind of weird. But that scene, the fight scene in the bamboo forest was really cool. And I think that's still a pretty cool fight scene. I think the biggest thing, American martial arts movies that were coming out during this time, probably before too, honestly, were not very good. Like they just couldn't. I feel like they couldn't really handle the choreography, and I just feel like they didn't know how to shoot these movies. You know, like because at this point, you know, Jackie Chan's been making movies for decades by this point, and his movies were leaps and bounds above what they could do in this movie and a lot of other martial arts action movies of the time. It's just when you see these U.S. fighting movies, not specifically action, not like shootouts and car chases and explosions, but I'm talking like specifically martial arts action. They just, compared to what we see today, you know, like the John Wicks, it just doesn't, it feels very dated. Everything feels slow and doesn't look very good. And I don't know.
Yeah. I'd say in the summary of summing up my thoughts on this particular movie, though, I would say just the feel of it, just the aesthetic experience of it, very good.
Oh, 100% agree. Yeah,
that's all I could say. That's what it boils down to for me.
Yeah, I mean, I realized that I might have said a lot of negative things about this movie, all of which I believe are warranted. But all of that being said, I still think that this is an absolute blast to watch. I don't know how much of it is nostalgia. Like, I feel like a lot of it is probably nostalgia for me, but
I don't really have a nostalgic connection to the movie, and I still liked a lot of it.
There you go. So it holds up. It holds up. Mortal Kombat 95. I mean, one thing for sure, and I would hazard a guess to say that most people would have this sentiment, and that's, this one is far more memorable than the 2021 one, and will always be more memorable than the 2021 one. This one has so much more character and personality compared to the new one. Like the new one's just forgettable, but this one has moments that you'll just remember them. So I think it has that going for it as well. So yeah, just check out, revisit Mortal Kombat if you haven't done so in a while. I would say that most people listening have probably seen this, but yeah, if you haven't, well worth a look. Where do you think? So, looking at the 4 movies that we covered, what do you think? What do you think your favorite one? Maybe not what you think is like the best or anything, but just your personal favorite. You sit in Mortal Kombat?
I think Super Mario Brothers.
I'm torn between Super Mario Brothers and Mortal Kombat. If you had asked me this before rewatching all of these, I definitely would have said Mortal Kombat, but I'm starting to lean towards Mario now. I really am. I really am. I think it was a more ambitious movie and did a lot more. It took a lot bigger risks, that's for sure too. And it tried things that it didn't play it safe. Did not play it safe, which is rare thing nowadays. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we close it off this month?
No, I think that is a good summary. Kind of the points that really well sums up the points that we've been making all through this episode, which is these movies aren't really that good, and some of them are quite bad, but they are just, you're right, that they're not safe in a way that a lot of movies today, if they were tasked with adapting these big properties, would go, or the certain way that all these movies kind of feel now. So I think it's a very interesting and telling and informative look at where kind of blockbuster filmmaking was in this very, again, I think that it is also very telling that just the very small window of time that they were all released in the mid 90s.
Yeah, and I think there were probably more than that too that were released around this time. There were certainly other video game adaptations that were coming out around the same time, I think. Either way, oh yeah, oh no, that was like late 90s. I was thinking of Wing Commander, which came out in, I think that was like 99 or something.
99. I think the list that I was looking at earlier seemed to suggest that in terms of major studio live action movies, there really weren't that many besides these four at this particular time.
Mm. All right. Well, I think the other thing, real quick, is that obviously being the age that they are, these are all shot on film, and I think that when you see like Monster Hunter, like comparing that to any one of these four movies, even like Double Dragon looking as cheap and crappy as it was, just the mere fact that it was shot on film instantly makes it look better than something that is like way more modern and glossy like Monster Hunter. Whereas if they shot Monster Hunter on film, I think that movie would have been, I don't know if it would have been regarded more highly or anything, but it certainly would have looked better.
Yeah, it does make me wonder to what degree am I just saying I like that these movies were shot on film as well.
I mean, that's a huge thing.
But
like
yeah, that is a huge part of it. You're right.
Anytime I watch, like as I'm watching these 90s movies that we've covered like over 100 of these movies on the show, like I often think about like, because my initial thought will be like, oh man, like the 90s just had some really interesting, really great movies, and then and then I think to myself, is it getting significant bonus points from me, like subconsciously, because it's shot on film and I just think it looks better, like it just looks higher quality, and I think that might be part of it.
Yeah, I think it does factor in. I think that maybe that is also what we're talking about when we talk about the way that big studio movies look now.
I remember when it was the Michael Mann film that came out. I think it was the Michael Mann, the one that was with Johnny Depp, about John Dillinger. Was that Michael Mann?
I think so. I think that was like Public Enemies.
Yeah, Public Enemies. I remember that came out and I saw it in the theater, and that was shot on digital, and I remember thinking to myself, this is it. Like, all movies are going to look like this moving forward, and I hate it. Like, I was like genuinely scared because, you know, like movies were my whole life back then, and I was like, because you know there were a whole bunch of the trend had already started of movies being shot on digital, but this one in particular was, because it was shot on digital and it was screened in digital, like on a digital projector at the theater. I just remember like thinking like, man, this is the beginning of the end. I'm gonna hate every movie that comes out, like just because it looks so bad. And to this day, I think that Public Enemies looks horrible. But
I only laugh because I just remembered, you know, Michael Mann, this movie before that. I haven't seen Public Enemies, but I've seen Miami Vice, and that's shot on digital with a very particular, like, its whole aesthetic is about it being shot on digital, and I actually really like how that movie looks.
That one, if I remember correctly, is different because of like the different like color grading that they use with
there's a very particular look to that movie. One, it's been a while since I've seen it, and two, even if I had just seen it this afternoon, I don't know if I could quite describe exactly how it looked.
Either way, I just saw digital just being the beginning of the end. And now, of course, everything is shot on digital for the most part, and I hate it all. I'm just kidding, but like there's so many times like I'll see a movie and I'll be like, man, I wish that was shot on film. It probably would have looked amazing if it was shot on film. All right, I think that's going to do it for this month. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can send us your 90s memories to 90s@filmpulse.net or by DMing us on Facebook or Twitter at 90spod. Also, if you get a moment, consider reviewing us on iTunes. That'd be great. Till next month, for Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson. This has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.